The alarm tore me out of the dream, a flat buzz sawing through the permanent midnight of my windowless cell. 0500 Mars Standard Time. Glowing digits on a plastic face, the only sunrise RedCore permitted on this level. I lay still for a breath, listening to the circulation fans tick and the ducks whisper, letting the last image of the nightmare dissolve. Twisted bodies, a red light strobing over skin the color of old rust, eyes that didn't blink. The floor was cold under my bare feet. The bathroom was a metal cupboard with a mirror that told the truth too well. Blue crescents under bloodshot eyes, stubble trying to pass for a beard, the face of a man who had traded 7 good years for a key card and a number on a door. I splashed water until my cheeks stung, then pulled on the standard issue jumpsuit. The R on the breast pocket, a slanted stroke of corporate optimism, caught the light, a little red flag over my heart. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and hot plastic. Every 20 meters, a camera iris winked awake as I passed. I swiped through 2 internal checkpoints and rode the lift up to the mess hall, where a low roar of voices tried to pretend what we did was normal. The protein synthesizer coughed a rope of gray paste into my tray. It shivered once and slumped, promise without taste. "You look like hell," Muller said, waving me to his table. He had the clean-shaven, square-jawed look of a man who slept because he refused to admit there was any alternative. "Another late night?" "Something like that," I said, pushing the paste around with my spoon. He leaned in, dropping his voice a notch. "Word is the brass are squeezing Resnick hard. They wanted a pilot this quarter. They'll settle for a miracle. Watch your back." "I always do," I lied. He nodded and changed the subject to reactor upgrades and corridor rumors, and I nodded back in the places that required it. The paste stuck to the roof of my mouth in a way that made me remember, unhelpfully, bread. The lab door unsealed from my palm, and the scanner sang my name. The air inside was cooler, honed. Racks whispered to themselves. The hum of centrifuges, the small music of pipettes settling into racks, the green heartbeat of status LEDs. These were the only lullabies that worked anymore. I lost the first hours in code and gels. The new sequence stack, a ladder of optimizations we'd nicknamed the Tharsis set, crawled across my screen. Alveolar expansions tuned for thin air, hemoglobin variants with hardier affinities, promoter regions designed to idle low on Earth and wake up on Mars. Bones next, a denser scaffold in the trabeculae, flexible enough to resist brittleness but strong enough to keep a spine honest in 1/3 G. Skin, a micro-keratin tweak to shed dust and heal quickly from the micro-abrasions that turned lungs to sandpaper if you let them. When the ping came, sharp and high like cut glass, I nearly spilled a tray of plates. "Dr. Crer, report to lab. 37. B, immediately. Dr. S, Resnick." The cursor blinked in the middle of a line of notes. I saved, encrypted, closed every window that had my fingerprints on it, and put my badge back on its lanyard with hands that didn't feel like mine. The restricted wing was 3 doors past, where my clearance pretended to end. At each checkpoint, a guard looked at my badge, then at my face, then at the authorization that had popped into place since the message. The last guard's eyes flicked to the camera, then to me, then away. The lock sighed. Resnick was waiting just inside 37B, hands in the pockets of a white coat, too crisp to be anything but new. She had the kind of face that convinced funding boards to say yes and subordinates to stop asking questions. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said. Her voice had that soft edge it got when the words mattered more than the tone. "There's something you need to see." We walked past machines I'd only seen in spec sheets. A ribosome printer the size of a shuttle bus, a bank of CRISPR arrays with custom error correct, a whole wall of incubators breathing in unison. The corridor opened onto an observation gallery, and then there was glass, and then there were bodies beyond the glass. They were not grotesque, which is perhaps what made it worse. They were plausible. Human proportions, lengthened a little, balanced differently at the hips and shoulders. Fingers, one too many. Sclera, a shade darker in the light. Skin with a faint mineral bloom like dust had chosen to live there. They moved with a confidence I associated with ships designed for vacuum, engineered for one environment, and content to be in it. "What are they?" I heard myself ask, as if the answer was not the shape of my last 2 years' work made flesh. "The future," Resnick said, clinical, almost tender. Human-Martian hybrids designed to thrive. "You're going to help us perfect them." I had rehearsed arguments, ethical frameworks, risk matrices, cautionary tales. None of them fit in my mouth. What did fit was the oldest sentence science knows, the one that hides under cave paintings and launch codes. "I do." If there was relief in her eyes, it didn't reach her mouth. "Good." We're behind time snapped into a different kind of measurement. Days became iterations. I learned the rhythms of 37B, the way the filtering in the air changed at shift change, the way the shadows crawled across the georacks as the overheads dimmed for night cycle. I wrote code until the variables looked like prayers. I stood at the glass and watched the bipedal silhouettes on the other side run, climb, breathe. On paper, the designs were elegant, beauty drawn in base pairs and protein folds. In practice, they were efficient in a way that made my skin itch. On the treadmill, heart rates barely lifted. In the low-pressure chamber, they laughed at numbers that had me seeing stars in 5 breaths. In the free climb, they hung by fingertips longer than any human I'd known, the extra digit biting into the grip like it had always been there. "Impressive," Resnick said one evening, her reflection alongside mine on the observation glass. "Yes," I said, "I meant it. I also meant something else I didn't say, and scary because I can see where the logic goes when it stops seeing people." I began giving them names in my head because numbers made it too easy to forget. The tall one who preferred to tuck her hair behind her left ear before a test. The compact one whose right eye crinkled a little when he solved a maze faster than the others. The one with the scar at the base of her thumb, a nick from a calibration rig that I had patched myself with adhesive and quiet words. The nick healed overnight. The words took longer. The acceleration order came as I was tuning post-translational checks in a set of muscle fiber mods. "We moved to phase 2, Resnick said without preamble. "Integration into the general workforce. We need to demonstrate viability outside controlled scenarios." "They're not ready," I said, the room tilting. "We haven't modeled long-term stability. We don't know what the stressors look like in real environments. We haven't even—" "This isn't a debate, Doctor." Crer didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We're at a hinge. Either we open it or we let it seize. 48 hours. The meeting ended itself. I stood alone with a soft machinery noise and a taste in my mouth like metal. I went back to my console because when everything else failed, I could always put my hands on work and make something line up. The new file arrived without a sound, encrypted, my personal key required. It hung there, small and patient, like a spider in a corner. I opened it because curiosity is the oldest and worst instinct I have. There was no audio, just a wide bay I didn't recognize, a conveyor, a hatch. Bodies moved past the frame, limbs too long, skin too mineral, obvious failures to a design that didn't tolerate them. Near the edge, one hand twitched as if groping for a ledge. The conveyor did not slow. The hatch vomited fire, and the camera lens caught the flare and smeared it into a white tear that hung for 3 frames and was gone. A timestamp in the corner last week. The file closed itself when I dragged for the end, as if that small mercy mattered. I made it to the bathroom in time to get my head over the sink. The water came out warm and smelled just enough like bleach to make me gag again. When I could stand, I looked into the mirror. The man looking back had a choice to make, and the ugly luck of understanding what all the choices cost. We were a long way from Earth. There were no courts to appeal to. The Colony Council was 3 floors up from the RedCore boardroom, and half the faces in both rooms were the same. The scariest thing about being the only adult in a room is realizing you still want to ask someone else what to do. The knock was soft enough to be polite and steady enough to insist. I froze. The second knock was the same. No pounding, no shouted name. Whoever it was didn't need noise as leverage. Dr. Crer? The voice barely carried through the door, low, urgent. Please, we need your help. I crossed to the peephole. The corridor light was dimmed for night cycle. The figure had to step closer before the lens made sense of the outline. It was the tall female from the observation room, the one I'd watched brace herself before every test like a diver on a board. Up close, the differences the glass softened were more noticeable. The depth to the eye, the way the nostrils widened almost imperceptibly on inhale, the line of tendons across the back of the hand. She looked right at the peephole, not through it. Against every protocol I'd written, I opened the door. She slid inside the instant the seal broke, an economy of motion that made me think of vacuum again. Up close, her eyes weren't inhuman. They were simply tuned for a different spectrum of light. "How did you get out?" I whispered. "How did you get here?" "We were never as contained as you thought," she said. Not a boast, a correction. "But that isn't the important part. We are leaving this facility. We need you. You'll die on the surface." The words came out reflexively, the way a lab safety warning finds its groove. "Unprotected exposure will..." A corner of her mouth lifted, not a smile. Something older. "You still don't understand what you built." She held out her hand. It was a human gesture that made something in my chest lurch in a way I wasn't proud of. "Come with us. See the truth of what's happening here. Help us stop it." I looked at her hand, at the door, at the camera in the ceiling. I could feel more than see. When I had imagined leaving, it had always been alone, with a pack and a plan and a headline no one would ever read. I had not imagined being invited. "What's your name?" I asked, because names straighten the spine. "Arya," she said. "Hurry." We took service corridors I'd never noticed, seams in the architecture that only reveal themselves if you know the trick of the angle. Twice she froze us in shadow while a patrol passed. Once she took my wrist and put my palm on a sensor I would have sworn was inert. It hummed and a panel slid back. Dust plumed up from the gap, sweet and dry, and the smell was so alien and so clean I wanted to put my face in it the way a child does in snow. The room on the other side of the panel contained things RedCore would have insisted didn't exist. environmental suits without registry tags, light enough to make you suspicious, with seals that closed like a memory and a HUD that woke as soon as your skin touched the lining. Arya tossed one to me. It caught the air and turned once, like it wanted to be looked at. "These aren't on inventory," I said, "because you say the obvious when your mind is sprinting to catch up." "Not everyone here agrees," she said. "Your name opens doors. Use it." I sealed the suit. The suit sealed me. A buttery wash of diagnostics ghosted across my vision. O2, pressure, temp, comms muted. It felt like standing inside a well-tuned instrument. Arya didn't put a helmet on. I began. She tilted her head, that not smile again, and keyed the exit. The door rolled back, and Mars arrived as if it had been waiting. The wind had a sound I had never heard through speakers, thin, high, eager. The sky was the color of a bruise healing. The ground under the floodlights was a collage of rock too old to remember oceans and dust too young to settle. Out past the lights, the darkness didn't look empty, it looked patient. Arya stepped into it like a woman walking down her own hallway. Her hair lifted, then fell. She did not flinch, she did not gasp, she did not die. My suit compensated, adjusting pressure and mix, a mother's hand fussing with a scarf. I followed, my boots hissing where dust sealed them in. For a moment, shrinking as the facility's lights fell away behind us, I wanted to turn back, to put my palm against a reader and let it hum my name and give me a room and a routine and a reason. Ahead, Arya didn't look back. She set a pace calibrated to the suit's tolerances in my breath, not hers. The horizon bled from black to iron, to the first suggestion of color. Somewhere in the red distance, dust devils danced like children in a schoolyard. "Where are we going?" I asked, more to anchor my voice in air I could hear than because I expected a full answer. "A place where the story they tell stops being the only one," she said. I adjusted my stride, matched her shadow, and stepped properly onto Mars for the first time, into the cold, into the thin, into a world that had not asked for us and might yet make room. Behind us, RedCore's wall shrank to a geometry problem. Ahead of us, the surface rose and fell, and the path through it was a line only she could see. I did not look back again. Arya led, and I followed, our shadows walking ahead of us in the thin light. The suit adjusted around my chest with every breath, tuning pressure like a careful hand. She needed none of it. The wind feathered her hair, and she blinked against the dust, as if it were weather and not a hazard warning. We moved along the lee of a low ridge, then down into a wash where the soil turned to clinkers that rang softly under my boots. The facility lights thinned to a smear on the horizon. The planet opened. Distance here didn't measure in meters. It measured in how long you could keep going without talking yourself into stopping. An outcrop rose from the plain ahead, a rusted tooth. Arya angled us toward a slit in its base you'd miss unless you already knew it. She tapped the rock in 3 places, specific as a surgeon's stitch. A panel slid back with sand grit quiet. Inside, a handful of hybrids waited, bodies carrying the same biology I'd watched through glass, now dressed in scavenged gear and wary, open eyes. One of them stepped forward, a man with a climber's build and the sort of stillness that stays still, because it has decided to. "You brought him," he said to Arya. His voice didn't accuse. "He's seen," she said. "He'll help." The man turned to face me. Up close, I could see the small architectural differences I'd signed off on in abstract, the subtle strengthening where tendons seamed into bone, the deeper set to the pupil, the extra phalanx in the hand that made his grip look wrong until you watched it move. "Dax," he said, "we don't have time to teach you the politics. We do have a plan." "What plan?" My voice sounded too loud in the narrow space. "Get to an old outpost. Link with people who remember how it was before RedCore wrote the rules. Then cut a hole in their network and make the truth bigger than their walls." "Corporate nets are airtight," I said, because it was the first reflex of my old life. "You might get a packet out. You won't get a Planet Dax's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then we'll push more than a packet." A vibration trembled through the stone. Arya cocked her head toward the entrance. The whine of engines sketched a line over the wash outside. Dax swore under his breath. "Security patrol! They pinged your suit when it checked the air. We split. Same rendezvous." He pressed a slate of coordinates against my forearm. My suit absorbed them with a brief warmth. "Stay on, Arya. If we're separated, keep moving outside." The wind had stiffened into a proper Martian weather. Dust streamed off the ridge in a red veil. Arya pulled me into the shadow of a boulder, checked the pattern of the distant lights, then traced a route with two quick gestures. We ran it, low, fast, the suit's servos kissing extra strength into my quads. Search beams shredded the dark 50 meters to our left. Arya tugged me into a slot between two rocks, and the suit's surface went dull and oddly cool as camouflage engaged, skin reading stone and pretending. The patrol passed. The wind erased our footprints with the impersonal efficiency of a conveyor belt. We dropped into a ravine barely wider than my shoulders. Halfway along, the wall opposite shuddered and split, a drill head the size of a tram nosing into daylight. Corporate suits spilled out, anonymous behind mirrored visors, to uncrate equipment I couldn't immediately name. Arya watched long enough to be sure they hadn't seen us, then touched my elbow and kept us moving. "We don't have the map anymore," she said, almost to herself. "We make it as we go." By the time we reached the old outpost, the storm had matured. Grains skittered over rock like dry rain. The structure emerged from the dust as a low, humped silhouette, cables trailing like kelp in tide. Its airlock woke reluctantly, cycling in a stagger that spoke of repairs and stubbornness. Inside smelled like old machines and the kind of human effort that doesn't end so much as pause. Lights flickered themselves steady. A hand caught my wrist as I tried to unseal the helmet. "Careful," a voice said, roughened by years and air. "Your lungs aren't tuned for what we breathe." I looked up into a face creased by weather and work, eyes that had borrowed colors from rock and sky. "Caspian," he said, "first wave, before share prices decided how much oxygen idealism costs. They ran me through a decompression chamber that whispered changes into the air mix and waited while my blood agreed to them. When the indicator settled into green, Caspian thumbed the seal on the inner door and led me into the heart of the place. It had been a research hub once, long benches, terminals in neat lines, storage bays with labels from a different decade. Now it was a village grafted onto a lab. Children, hybrid and human, threaded past in quiet games. The walls wore lists and maps and a calendar where the days had names instead of numbers. The room at the center held a bank of old computers lashed together into a network with cabling that made the floor hum. On the largest screen, RedCore's logo flickered every few seconds, like a heartbeat you could interrupt if you knew the trick. Caspian tapped a key and history appeared. Files from the early years, modifications that were gentle and reversible, consent forms that were conversations instead of contracts. He let the sequence play forward until the tone changed. Budgets blooming where biology should be. Memos about throughput. Slides where oxygen percentages and productivity curves choreographed a dance that ended in that body shoot I could not unsee. "We built for survival," he said. "They built for profit." Somewhere between those two verbs is the line we need to find again. A siren tone cut across the room, soft but urgent. Dax stumbled in with 3 others, dust streaking their clothes. "Patrol swept wider than we expected," he said. "We don't have the day we wanted." "Then we take the hour we have," Caspian replied, and looked at me. "Can you get our voice into their mouth?" "I can ride their comm spine if I can anchor to a node," I said, already sketching the map in my head. "Nearest outpost with a hub I know is less than 20 clicks. Maintenance airlocks on the east face for drone servicing. If no one has changed the default, I can own the panel in under 5 minutes. And if they have, then we take 6. We prepped with the haste of people who know the difference between fast and sloppy. Arya and I worked over my suit, scrubbed its signature, gave it a way to answer pings like a harmless drone, added a bluff ID that would make the first gate hesitate. Dax laid out the route and the fallback for if the route failed. Caspian put his hand on my shoulder as I sealed my helmet. "You can still choose the version of yourself you'll have to live with," he said. "That doesn't stop being true just because it's late." We left as the storm peaked, letting the planet's temper hide our motion. The outpost loomed up from the red like a ship punching through surf. The east face was a flat wall of armor and some very persuasive signage. The maintenance airlock crouched low, a square mouth rimed with dust. I jacked my suit into its panel and watched the interior logic unwind. RedCore had changed the default. Of course they had. But the man who had changed it, a Rana from facilities, if the annotation tags were honest, had a favorite pattern in his salts that I'd seen before. I walked it in reverse. The lock thought about it and decided I was a drone that mattered. We poured into the mouth as searchlights pivoted. Someone shouted on an exterior channel. Weapons fire stitched the dust where we had been. The inner door took a beat too long to cycle, and then we were in a corridor that went in 3 directions at once. "Up 2 levels to comms," I said, and we ran for the stairs because the lift was a death wish. Twice, we had to slip into service shafts while a patrol's boot slammed past. Once, we came around a corner directly into a squad. The instant froze, a held breath, and then went hot. Dax moved low and fast, the extra joint in his hand paying out dividends in the way the rifle sat, and fired. Arya took 3 clean shots that weren't lethal, but would keep those men from standing soon. I palmed the security plate and told it lies it wanted to believe. The blast door sighed down behind us. The hub room was a circle of screens and hum. I slid into the chair at the master console and felt every reflex of my old life snap into place like teeth in a gear. The first 2 back doors had been patched. The third was there, smaller, placed by a younger me for a contingency I had never thought I would use. I opened it, apologized to the part of me that had been proud of the find, and walked myself into route. "How long?" Dax asked, eyes on the door. 3 minutes to spine," I said. 2 to compose. Less if I skip pretty, Arya said. She rested a hand on the back of my chair, steady and cool through the suit's padding. The PA crackled, and Resnick's voice filled the room, threaded through with restraint that had been iron on other days and was foil now. "Dr. Crer," she said, as if we were alone. "You think you're saving them? You're not. You're breaking the only bridge we have to survival. Don't do this. Doubt is not a voice. It's a gravity. It found my joints. It made my fingers heavy." Arya's hand firmed. "You saw," she said, not asking. "You know." I did. I told the spine to open its throat. It did. I pointed a dozen old relays at a dozen domes and gave the mesh a taste of itself. Screens across the hub bloomed with files pulled from vaults that were supposed to be air-gapped, gene maps annotated with timestamps and initials, purchase orders for incinerators categorized as sanitation upgrades, footage that required no commentary. I stitched a message across the top and bottom of the feed, not eloquent, not subtle, the shortest sentence I trusted. This is what we did. This is how. This is who paid. The door blew. Resnick stood on the threshold with a line of security arrayed behind her, eyes bright as if fever had rewired her. "You fool," she said, and the microphone picked up her breath and made it a hiss. "Do you understand what you've set in motion?" "I do," I said. "I should have sooner." Not all the rifles behind her were steady. The feed was on every screen in the facility now, and on the corner of every screen, because I put it there, was a little window showing a live count of how many external nodes had synced. The number leaped, stuttered, leaped again. Somewhere, a technician in hydroponics dropped a spanner and stared. Somewhere, a woman in sanitation sat down very carefully on a crate and covered her mouth with both hands. Somewhere, Muller from genetics found a wall and the wall held him up. The ComNet lit. "Is it real?" someone asked, the question bare and unadorned. "Can confirm," engineering said. "Cross-referencing asset IDs. Serial numbers match." My God, Resnick snapped back to herself. "Lock it down," she snarled. "All non-essential personnel to quarters." "Security seize." Chaos fell into the room like furniture. Dax used it. 3 shots. One to the light, one to a camera, one to the leg of the man who still had his rifle leveled with decision. Arya pulled me up by the harness, and we moved because staying to win an argument is how you lose a life. The corridors had learned a new language in the time we'd been inside them. Inside offices, voices rose and collided. In the domes beyond the walls, knots of workers formed rankless lines. Some lifted their hands to show they were not reaching for tools. Some reached for tools anyway and stopped at the weight of the decision. A child tugged at a mother's sleeve and pointed at a screen where an unblinking eye looked back with footage and did not look away. A foreman tried to order a crew back to stations and discovered he had learned how to command a silence he no longer owned. We hit the hangar at a run. A transport sat on a pad. 2 techs belting down a panel and arguing about protocols. Arya dropped a hand on the nearest console. A pulse of electromagnetic noise coughed into the bay, and half the alarms went blind for 3 seconds. It was enough. Dax took the pilot's chair, hands finding controls the way his feet had found ledges in the dark. The hangar doors began to close. The transport's engines came awake like a large animal deciding to live. Security poured in on the far side. Too many. Too late. The ship tore the air, and the sand below it exploded, a red blossom. We punched out into a sky that didn't want to hold us, then climbed anyway. On the screens, The feed ran like a river in flood. Nodes multiplied across the planetary map, lighting up from the mines near Arger to the farms clinging green along valleys. Messages overlaid messages until the whole thing looked like static. But it wasn't noise. It was content the filters had been trained to ignore until the volume made ignoring a labor. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes of flight. There was nothing to add to the sound of the engines and the storm and the pounding in my throat. When we breached the densest dust, Mars stretched beneath us, a red map, scribbled over in gray where the wind had kept secrets for 1,000 years. I realized, with a small, useless laugh, that I had done the thing I'd promised myself I would never do. I had burned the bridge behind me. "Course?" Dax asked, eyes never leaving the instruments. Arya laid in coordinates. "Home," she said, "for now." The hidden settlement made a new kind of sense when I saw it from above, the caves forming a network of ribs, the entrances shielded from prevailing winds, the panels catching what anemic sunlight could be coaxed into power. We sat down at the edge of a broad chamber where the rock had been cut and polished by time and water and adapted by hand. As the engine spun down, noise rose to meet us, a living sound, many voices. Humans and hybrids crowded the bay, faces I didn't know yet, faces that would become a geography if I survived long enough to learn it. Caspian shouldered to the front, his eyes going first to Arya, then to me. Quick assessments nested inside longer ones. "You did it," he said, not a celebration so much as an acknowledgement of a thing completed and 1,000 things begun. Screens lined one wall here as they had in the old outpost, but these wore the planet like a cloak. A feed from a dome where a supervisor took off his badge and set it quietly on a table. A feed from a tunnel where a line of workers, hybrid and human, moved not toward a shift but toward a gate. A feed from a schoolroom where a teacher, hand shaking, explained in simple words what a corporation is and what it isn't. I stood in the middle of it and felt something catch behind my ribs. Not regret, not relief, not yet. Something like alignment, an ugly truth and a necessary choice finally occupying the same sentence. "Listen," Caspian said, lifting his chin at the screens where new messages queued faster than fingers could sort them. "It's begun." My suit released its hold on me with a sigh. I pulled the helmet free. The air here carried the breath of 100 living throats, the tang of mineral dust, the green hint of algae in a distant tank. Arya's hand found my shoulder, the same place it had anchored me in the comm hub. "You did not do it alone," she said, as if answering a thing I hadn't dared to say. "It's going to be worse before it's better," Dax said from the threshold, eyes on the map we had lit and the fire we had thrown into it. I thought of Resnick in the doorway, of Muller's voice gone thin with disbelief, of all the people in between who had not known until they did and would never unknown now. I thought of the bodies in the chute and the hand that had twitched and the choice to look away that I had worn as a uniform until it didn't fit anymore. "We made a crack," I said, mostly to myself. "Now we hold it open." In the far distance, a tremor rolled through the rock, whether weather or engines or something else I could not tell. The screens jittered as the mesh rerouted around a cluster of dark nodes. New lights came up on the rim of Elysium, where there had been none a minute ago. The room breathed in, then out. I did the same. We had broadcast the truth. Mars had heard. Now it would answer. The day after the broadcast, Mars learned to speak with 1,000 mouths at once. In the command room, hewn from stone and stubbornness, every screen shouted a different truth. A mine foreman handing his badge to the smallest worker in the line, a sanitation crew sitting cross-legged in a corridor while a supervisor argued himself hoarse. 2 guards in a dome vestibule lowering their rifles together like men realizing they were holding a mirror. The mesh pulsed, rerouted, expanded. Whole settlements flickered on as if rising from sleep. Others went dark and stayed dark. We sent food maps, med triage, legal templates that were more wish than law. Every message ended the same way. Hold the line. Don't give them your silence back. The answers were messy, human. A hydroponics team struck and then unstruck when they saw the water levels dropping. A processing plant locked itself down and then opened its doors to let families through. In a storage bay in Sector 12, a woman I didn't know stood in front of a camera and said, "We didn't know," and the room behind her murmured like a tide, "We did." Earth looked up. The United Earth Government appeared on our largest screen, starched and engraved. The statement was clean and cold. Cease, comply, explain, or we will. On Earth, the feed we'd ripped into the open found new lungs, marches and countermarches, pundits feeding like gulls. Words that had been theory for a century grew teeth in an afternoon. Personhood, consent, species. Suddenly, everyone had a definition. "Eat," Arya said, putting a tin bowl next to my keyboard. Algae, grains, a green curl of something that remembered a leaf. She had been gone for 2 days, pulling people out of a buried lab in Sector 6. The wind had rasped its print along her cheekbones. The suit under her jacket smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. When she slept, she did it upright, in 10-minute investments that came back doubled. "I'm not hungry," I said, and then ate, because I still obeyed voices that used the imperative gently. By evening, the first counter-offensive found us. Drones with corporate seals strafed a caravan of defectors on the Elysium Flats. We watched, helpless and livid, as Dax redirected our only interceptor and arrived 3 minutes too late. He returned to the cavern stiff with fury, set his palms on the map table hard enough to make the panels judder, and didn't speak for a long time. We were still triaging the day's fires when the message came. It wore a cleanliness that made my stomach clench. "Dr. Crer, this has gone on long enough. I am prepared to negotiate terms. Come alone to the coordinates provided. You have my word you will not be harmed." Xavier Vale, CEO, RedCore. The room reacted like a muscle. "It's bait," Dax said. "They'll cut off the head they think is leading." "I'm not a head," I said. "I'm a man with a mouth." "Which is what they want quiet," he shot back. Arya's gaze never left mine. "If there's a chance to stop the bleeding, take it," she said softly. "But don't mistake an outstretched hand for an open door." Caspian shrugged into the frame of the doorway, arms crossed. "You can measure a man by what he risks to keep what he already owns," he said. "Vale owns too much to come empty-handed. Go, but don't go defenseless." "I'll go alone," I said, and felt the old stupid pride snap into place like a badge. It's his condition. I held up a palm before the objections could bloom. Not alone. Mesh open, fail-safe set. If I don't say the phrase we agreed on every 20 minutes, pull me out of the air like a bad tooth. Arya looked as if she wanted to take my wrist and hold it until the impulse passed. Instead, she stepped close and tightened the shoulder strap on my suit. "If he lies," she said, "lie better." The facility Vale chose for our meeting used to reassure me. Gleaming corridors, glass that kept the world arranged, the chemical scent of clean. Now the light felt interrogatory. The airlock opened on a vestibule lined with cameras that tracked like eyes. I walked into it and cataloged exits, old instinct keeping my mind busy while my stomach performed small revolutions. He met me in a room designed to be neutral, glass, aggregate, the soft purr of conditioning systems. Xavier Vale looked like the projections on investor decks, mid-40s by choice. Hair threaded just enough gray to imply seriousness, but the edits were there if you knew where to look. The sclera held more pigment than Earth eyes. The tendons at his wrists braided a fraction stronger than my anatomy textbooks allowed. When he crossed the room, one fluid adjustment of posture betrayed training in a lower gravity than any boardroom ever had. "Dr. Crer," he said, smiling like a man who could taste 7 flavors. Charm, apology, inevitability, threat, relief, calculation, and something that might have been respect. "Thank you for coming." "You're edited," I said, and let the surprise show because he wanted me to. He didn't look away. "It surprises people less than it used to." We were never purely one thing, not on Mars. A second figure stepped into the light beside him, and my throat went cold. Resnick. She looked smaller without the lab at her back. Her posture was perfect, as if defiance could be performed into fact. "Doctor," she said. "No title, no honorific." Her mouth barely moved. Vale gestured us to a table. "You forced our hand," he said conversationally. "You also forced our face. Perhaps that's good. Masks are terrible for the skin. Start talking," I said, "before Earth does it for us." He did, not the history I wanted to hear, but the one that fit too well. The hybridization project, its bones, not its excesses, was not a corporate invention. The first colonists, staring at pressure numbers and death curves in a planet that killed in minutes, had done what humans do. They hacked the biology they had to fit the physics they didn't. The early work had been careful, consented, slow. Then the corporations arrived with scale and saw the shortest distance between 2 profit lines. Somewhere, the project became a machine that turned bodies into quarterly growth. "I was born on Mars," Vale said quietly. "I've never felt at home under a sky that doesn't look like this through glass." I want to be honest about the part we played. He didn't look at Resnick when he said we. I also want to be honest about what comes next. Earth will come. If they come as police, we need a government to meet them. If they come as saviors, we need a story stronger than theirs. Either way, if we keep pretending we're a front office and a set of domes, we'll be a client for the next century. "Your concern for our sovereignty is touching," I said. "Almost as touching as your drones." He winced. "Some of that was not commanded." Resnick let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so sharp. "We lost compartments when he broke your network open," she said. "Everything talks to everything now. That's not always a blessing." "Then let's build compartments we can live with," I said, and put what I had brought on the table between us. A plan I had drafted in the weird, ragged hours when the mesh was quiet and my guilt was loud. "Self-rule," I began, "a Martian charter ratified by settlements, not shareholders. Hybrid and human status equal by law with restitution for the people we broke to get here. A science council with veto power over any modification that touches consent or inheritance. No for-profit research on fundamental edits, ever. Terra systems built into commons, air, water, mesh, so no one can price oxygen again. And I swallowed, because this was the clause that would make everyone hate me in equal measure. A long plan to adapt everyone who chooses Mars gradually, by choice, and with oversight. So we stopped being a species living on time borrowed from machines. Silence sat with us. In it, I heard my own heartbeat. Resnick stared at my face like it was a problem with the wrong units. Vale steepled his fingers. "You'll never get Earth to bless independence," he said. "We don't ask," I said. "We declare, and then we make it inarguable." "Your council will jam innovation when it's needed," Resnick said. "You'll make a priesthood where there was an engine. The engine burned people," I said. "Priests can be defrocked. Engines just eat." I expected anger. I got something worse. Consideration. Vale rose and went to the glass, put his palm against it like a pilgrim. Beyond, the planet lay flat and red and unpersuaded. "I can live with most of it," he said at last. "We'll fight over the details. We'll both lose things we think are essential and discover they weren't. But we need to stop the bleeding now. Earth will not wait for our perfect draft." Resnick didn't move. "You're choosing to be small," she said to him, to me, to the window, "when you could be large." Vale's reflection blinked, slow as a cat. "I'm choosing to be alive here," he murmured. Then louder to me, "We sign, we announce, we stand in it together, and if Earth lands, we greet them as a government, not a riot." "You're assuming I trust you," I said. "No," he said. "I'm assuming we scare each other enough to keep our hands visible." We signed that night. Not the final thing that would go into archives with a name that made school children yawn. The first thing, untidy and provisional, the scaffolding around which a longer future could set. We called it the Vales Accord because we did not have the time to think of something beautiful. Vale spoke to the mesh in a voice tuned for calm. RedCore would dissolve into a public trust. Assets moved to commons. A joint transitional council formed of colonists, hybrids, engineers, medics. Resnick's name, absent by her choice or his, I couldn't tell. The mesh did not cheer. It hesitated, like a body touching water to see if it is cold. Then, like a pulse returning, messages began to switch from present tense to future. When we vote, where we place the new arrays, how we staff the clinics. Arguments flared green at the edges of the map. Not enough, too much, not fast enough, too fast, good. Arguments meant people believed there would be a tomorrow worth fighting in. The months that followed taught me verbs again. We negotiated power transfers that felt like amputations and grafts. We rewired supply lines so algae wasn't a hostage. We stood up tribunals that could not, by charter, kill anyone. We minted IDs that didn't sort by genome. We drafted a consent regime that took 300 ordinary words to say what 20 legal ones never had. No means no. Yes means yes. You can change your mind. None of it was clean. A strike in Borealis turned into a street fight when a warehouse boss tried to hold back food vouchers. A clinic in Sector 3 was firebombed by men who sang songs about purity as the flames ate the wall. Resnick disappeared. I caught sight of her once, on a grainy feed from a private dock, climbing into a hopper with a case and her hair pulled back tight as a threat. Miller sent a message with only 3 words. I was wrong. I wrote back, "Me too," and did not send it. Arya spent herself in missions that never ran out. When she returned, she moved quietly, all edges, and emptied fuel. "How do you teach someone they are a person?" she asked me one night. when their first language is obedience. We were on a catwalk above the algae cisterns, watching the green breathe. "You don't," I said. "You learn it beside them." She did not answer. She leaned her shoulder against mine, and for a minute we were two silhouettes and a gentle machine. I should have known peace would not arrive with a signature. It did not even send a postcard. Winter on Mars shifts the light into the blue end of the scale. In that thin, slow season, I retreated to a small station that hung on the lip of Valles Marineris. Like an afterthought, the canyon ran to the horizon, a wound that had decided not to close. I told myself I was there to draft the charter articles that required a quiet, a cavern full of coordination did not afford. The truth was simpler. I needed to hear my own thoughts without the mesh translating them into tasks. The calm woke me at 3:10 with Arya's voice shot through with restraint. "Multiple contacts," she said, "just broke the outer mark. Burned signatures don't match anything in our registry. They're not answering hails I did not ask who. My bones already knew." "Earth," I said. "What do we do?" Her breath made a small cloud in the microphone. The question was not fear, it was logistics. It still put a hairline crack through my sternum. Outside the viewport, the canyon was a black mouth. I put my palm on the glass and felt nothing, because feeling is for atmospheres thick enough to carry it. "Wake the council," I said. "Get Vale out of whatever meeting he's trying to win and into a room where he can't. Spin up ports, not guns. We greet them like a government. We keep every camera we own on. If they come kind, we give them tea. If they come cruel, we give them witnesses. And if they come confused?" Arya asked. "Then we tell them a story true enough to hold them." I drew breath and felt the suit of my old life settle over my shoulders, lighter now that it had been cut to fit. Open the mesh to public address. One by one, faces populated the wall of my station. Caspian with his jaw set, Dax in a control chair, hands poised, as if ready to steer a planet. 100 settlement leaders with sleep in their eyes and resolve under it. 1,000 more faces in smaller squares, technicians, cooks, children, a woman in a corridor with her hand on a dog's head, the dog looking up as if the voice were saying its name. "Listen," I said, and the word went out into a net we had pulled over a world. "We are going to be measured today not by Earth, by ourselves. We are not the story they told us, a colony that can be managed, a workforce that can be optimized, an era that can be contained. We are the story we wrote with our broadcast, people who looked at a machine and decided to stop feeding it, people who built houses and caves and laws out of air and a future out of no permission at all." I glanced at the telemetry the council feed had pushed to a corner of my screen. The contacts multiplied, resolved into signatures, then into hulls. They were not a fleet so much as a statement. Escorts, carriers, something too large to be carrying only medicine. "If they come as friends," I said, "we don't flinch. If they come as owners, we don't bow. If they come as children with guns, we take the guns and teach the children to breathe thin air. We do what we've done since we decided to stop dying how someone else told us to." I didn't say the last sentence for them. I said it for myself and for the man I had been who signed forms with their corners too sharp. We fight. We adapt. We survive. In orbit, the first ship burned. The atmosphere caught the heat and wrote it across the sky, a long white scar. People stepped out of their doorways and tipped their heads back to watch the streak become a point. The point, a roar. A boy in Sector 9 pressed his palms to the glass of a school window and grinned like this was a parade. His teacher did not correct him. At my console, the alarms went from polite to insistent. The hulls dropped vectors. Ports pinged readiness. I flicked to the settlement cameras and saw shoulders square, hands find other hands. Tools set down carefully so they would not look like weapons in the wrong photo. Vale joined the mesh window, already mid-sentence to a cluster of regional leads, posture contained and eyes incandescent. He saw me and nodded once. It was not friendship. It was a truce made of fear and choice. Arya's feed came up last. She stood on the ridge above the cavern base, the wind making small weather out of her hair. Behind her, our people, hybrid and human, filled the slope like a topography. She lifted her hand, a signal, a greeting, a promise. "Whatever happens," she said into the mesh, "we are not going back." The first lander cut sound into stone. Dust leapt. The hatch cycled. Across a planet, 1,000,000 lungs took the same breath. The door began to open.